It's great to be here tonight. I do want to tell you, of course, I know that I probably will not necessarily address everything when it comes to executive functioning, but hopefully we're going to touch the surface and answer some questions. I did get some questions in advance, so I may have already answered your question, but we are going to have time at the end as well to do questions and, have a little bit of time to dialogue and talk, okay? So a little bit about me. I am a counselor over at Grow Wellness Group, as Dawn just pointed out, and Grow Wellness Group is over at 5th Avenue Station. And I also am at Mattia for the second school year, Mattia High School. And this year I'm working with EL, so English learning students, and then also freshmen. We know freshmen come in and need a lot of help sometimes adjusting to high school, right? So I'm here tonight to address executive functioning, so we're gonna get started with that. Helping my child get organized, thriving through chaos. We know that it can be chaos, and I'm not sure of all the ages of your children, right? But we're gonna touch on some things that maybe you're seeing, right? And you want some solutions for. So first, what is executive functioning? Maybe you know already, maybe you don't, but we're gonna kind of go through that. So according to Harvard, it says executive functioning skills, they're to help us focus attention, switch gears, and juggle tasks, okay? Executive functions are mental skills that help individuals perform everyday tasks and meet goals, okay? So I have a few here that we're going to talk about. This is not exhaustive. There are more, right? There are varying opinions on how many executive functioning skills actually exist, right? So maybe there will be some that you feel aren't on the list, right? And that's because there are so many. So overall, some say there are 3 main executive functioning skills that everything fit into. And then some will say there's as many as 12. Okay, so some others that you may have heard of that aren't on this list might be self-restraint or stress tolerance or distress tolerance. Also, focus, task initiation, planning, defining and achieving goals is another one, or prioritization. So today we're going to focus on organization. I bet a lot of you want to talk about that, right? So that's just basically keeping things in order. Time management, that's a big one. Even sometimes adults, we struggle with time management, right? If we're being honest. So using time efficiently. Working memory, remembering information, right? Cognitive flexibility, adaptability to new and different situations. And then self-control. So with self-control, that is basically managing self. How are we managing, right? Not just the outside, right? But also like internally, how are we managing our emotions, our thoughts, right? That influence our behavior, how we act, how we react, how we respond, right? So that's super important, okay? We're gonna talk, but I do wanna kind of go back for a second, okay? So let's talk a little bit about how you can set your child up for success, okay? So setting the stage, what does that look like? How they can, develop those positive executive functions. I don't want you to think that it's too late, no matter what age your child is. There are ways that you can work with them, right? But we want to kind of go back. So there are 3 important areas that I wanted to address quickly here. Maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't. So we'll talk a little bit about them. So cognitive behavioral approach. Some of you may have heard of CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, okay? So what does that do? Cognitive, that's referencing cognitions, our thoughts, okay? It's super important for us to think about what we're thinking about, right? And so adults, we need to be mindful of that, but our children too, we have to start fostering positive mindsets. We have to help them with that, right? They may not know that their thoughts aren't positive. So core beliefs, it goes back to what are your kids thinking about themselves, about their environment, about their world, right? Right now, the state of the world, some of you may be concerned, right? Kids are too, right? And they're talking about it. So core beliefs, basically thoughts that have solidified into a belief system that governs everything for an individual. We'll talk a little bit more about core beliefs. Self-talk, cognitive distortions. Self-talk is, what are we saying? What are we saying to ourselves? What's that dialogue going on here, right? So it's super important that we think about that. Is it positive? Is it negative? We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then I did kind of put cognitive distortions there too, because it's important that we have the self-awareness to know, once again, what our thought life is like. Cognitive distortions are irrational beliefs, but sometimes we don't know, especially in the moment, and kids definitely don't know that it's irrational, right? So we have to help them with that. And there are some cognitive distortions that you will be very familiar with, like black or white thinking, right? When you have a tendency, like fortune telling is another one, like you just predict, you know, like this is gonna happen, like it always, that word always, always and never, those two words are a little dangerous, right? It's not always a certain way, right? And something, you can't use the word never loosely like our children sometimes do, and maybe we do as an adult as well. So we have to kind of address that also. So basically, I wanted to reference while I'm on this slide real quick here, the cognitive triangle. So again, going back to CBT, the cognitive triangle is something that's super important to kind of think about when you are, again, trying to set your child up for success, but even how we as adults may act or react, right? So with the cognitive triangle, it talks about a situation or an event, right, that occurs. Basically, it's describing, I should say, a situation or an event, right? Once you have that situation or event, you have a thought about it, right? You, your child, I'm just giving in general scenario here. So you have a thought about that event or that situation, and then that thought will lead to, we feel some kind of way, right? We emote a feeling when it comes to that thought or that situation that originally created the thought, right? And it's a triangle because they all influence each other, because then once that thought influences the way you feel or the way you emote or express your emotions, that turns into the action, right? The behavior. So thoughts, feelings, emotions, and behaviors, it's this vicious triangle, right? Because they all influence one another. Super important to keep that in mind. Emotions and feelings, basically, they're gonna result to the way that we act or react. Core beliefs, I just wanted to kind of highlight a couple core beliefs that maybe you wouldn't even think that your child might be thinking. Maybe a core belief might be, I'm unlovable. I don't do anything right. And if that's at the premise, right, that's a belief that they have, it's gonna affect everything in their world. How they think, how they, make decisions on what they're gonna do, what they're not gonna do, right? So that's super important. Another one might be, I'm not good enough, right? One that might be perceived as being positive is, it'll work out. Everything works out in the end. That could be a core belief that you might think, oh, that's good, like hold on to that, right? But no, everything doesn't always work out in the end. There's that word always again. But we have to be mindful of what our children are thinking about, right? And those core beliefs, what deep down they're believing about themselves and the world they live in. So also moving along, I do want to talk about negative self-talk. So when it comes to negative self-talk, there is a great author, maybe some of you have heard of him, his name is Shad Helmstetter. He has a lot of information out on anxiety, depression, a lot of things that quick read books. He also has a website out there with some free information. He does have some information too if you wanted to purchase, but he talks about how many times we hear the word no as we're growing up. So think about it, as parents, we tell our children no a lot. In the beginning, we don't recognize it, but we either tell them no or something that they cannot do, because what are we doing? We're trying to keep them safe, right? We're trying to protect them from something. But he's done research, and he says by the time we're 18 years old, we've heard no or what we cannot do over 148,000 times. That's a lot. That's negative, right? And so we have to be intentional in being positive. So even if it's just, and this I'm sure you've heard before, if you want your child not to run, instead of saying stop or no or don't run, you could say walking feet in the house. It's a positive way, right? We have to think about that and be intentional how we're interacting, okay? So cognitive distortions, again, I talked about that. That's irrational thoughts. So moving along, real talk. So I just want to kind of cover a couple different things, and then we're going to jump into organization. So parents, if you can, work to model a behavior, right, that you want to see or that you expect in your children, right? Sometimes it's difficult. We maybe feel like we struggle in a certain area. Be honest, be vulnerable with your kids and let them know. Don't try to put on this, appearance that you're perfect, right? And you're not, because they see through that and they know when you struggle in other areas too. So when it's not possible, just be upfront with them. Share your struggles, be vulnerable, and don't pretend. Children will see through it, as I was just saying, and then they may assume the worst, or they may feel unworthy of truth. And again, that kind of goes back to a core belief that then they form about themselves. Okay, so be intentional. Validate emotions and feelings that children are displaying. Help distinguish between emotion and feeling versus a reaction or being reactive. Okay, they don't know many times. And sometimes what happens is we will associate certain behaviors as negative, right? Or we categorize certain feelings or emotions as negative. Same thing, we will categorize certain feelings or emotions as positive or good. We should not make emotions and feelings good or bad. They're all okay, and kids need to know they're okay. It's how we behave or how we act or how we react to those feelings that we're feeling. We have to teach them positive coping strategies, right? So that's what we're here for, right? But I wanted to just make sure that we talk about all emotion is okay. So moving on, encourage problem solving. That helps to build stress and distress tolerance, okay? So it's important to encourage them to try to solve the problem themselves, not just think mom or dad is supposed to solve it for them, right? Ask open-ended questions. What do you think you should do? How did you feel when that happened? What was the first reaction you had? Like, just ask them to make them think, right? So once they feel empowered, they know, okay, like, they trust me. I can make a good decision, right? So just empowering them. Allow for downtime and time to complete homework and tasks. So when it comes to what we're talking about, executive functioning, sometimes we overload our kids. We want them to be involved in all the activities, but then we want them to still have time to get their homework done or have piano lessons or, make sure you participate in a sport, right? And we overload them, and then they don't know the importance of downtime. And sometimes then when there is a little bit of downtime, what do they say? I'm bored. They're used to being overscheduled, right? We want to teach them that being bored is okay. Be creative. Use your imagination. What could you do right now, right? Downtime is good. Build it in. You have to help them, not overschedule them. Okay, organization. Let's get into it. So order. Who defines order? How open are you? Are you willing to be? How open are you willing to be on this? Like, who's going to establish order? Because we sometimes have this power struggle with our kids because, oh my gosh, that's a mess. And they're like, what do you mean? No, I just straightened that up, right? And so to them, maybe they feel like they've done a great job. And then you come in like, what is this mess, right? And it's like, oh, like they're deflated. Even if they don't show it, they're deflated, right? So we have to be intentional when we're having conversations with them and try to let them set the tone, right, for order, right, so that they can gain organization skills. And when they're struggling, they might be more willing to be open and talk to you about it. Like, well, what do you think I should do with my blankets? I just thought I could throw them at the end of my bed. And you're like, no, I think they might be nicer folded. Right? You can start having those conversations and they'll trust you and come to you with that. So you want to establish ground rules together, right? If you're able to do that together, then they won't feel like they're always being told what to do, right? And they will have some ownership there and they can, talk together with you. You want to encourage or help your child create a system that they can thrive in. So they believe like, I did this, right? And it's not just mom told me to do this, dad told me to do this, right? Checklists. You can use checklists to establish order. What needs to be done? Sometimes they don't know where to start. So first, let's just say, okay, what do you have to do today? Excuse me. And then give them the opportunity to track progress. Most schools give a school planner. Maybe that's where you start. Did you write down what you need in the planner? Right? And maybe if you build on that, then you can have things at home too that they will start to depend on, and maybe then order is more important to them, right? Because they know, okay, I could track my progress, I can see what I'm doing. Sometimes, it's as simple as being able to check, I did that. Or if they've got like sticky notes, okay, I could throw that one away because that's done, right? And they can see that they're making progress and feel good about it, okay? Have check-ins, right? If you're able to check in with them, they know, okay, like you're trusting them to be responsible, but you're gonna follow up. But have days or times that you check in with them and say, okay, you're good? You got everything done? You know, or what have you, but not where it feels like you are judging them in a sense, right? And sometimes our presence, they just feel like they're being judged. I get that. So also with check-ins, you want to make sure that you're following up with the check-ins to make sure, like if you've agreed upon a particular system or rules, that you're checking according to those, right? That it's not just random stuff that you're asking them about. Because then again, that's where they feel judged, that judgment might come in. And allow for autonomy in their space, their bedroom, their workspace. Make sure they feel like they're able to kind of dictate some things in that space so they can take ownership over it and they can self-govern and hold themselves responsible, right? That's empowering for kids. So basically order, if I didn't say it already, it may look different to your children than it does to you, right? So again, that comes back to that autonomy, right? Some other things that you could put in place, I mentioned a school planner, but maybe like an assignment notebook, same, similar concept, a calendar, right? That's their own personal calendar, maybe a whiteboard. Maybe you have a whiteboard in the house and they like to write on the whiteboard. They might want to add some things and be responsible for their particular things that they need to do, their to-do list, right? So empower them to have their workspace in a functional way that works for them, okay? And then also, just stress and routine. I just wanted to make sure I highlight that order, routine, go hand in hand, okay? So time management. I'm gonna go ahead and shift to time management. So with time management, you wanna make sure that they're using their time efficiently. What does that mean? They may not know. So again, you're gonna want to allocate the proper time, like show them how to do that, because guess what? You're modeling behavior, they're watching you, right? Are you always racing to do something, running late for appointments, things like that? They're watching you. But if you show them how to properly allocate their time, you definitely are modeling that good behavior, but it doesn't mean you're perfect. I'm not expecting parents to be perfect, right? Prioritization will come into play. So showing them like what's priority. So for example, when they're young, right? Before, they get their first job and all that type of stuff, school is their job. Do you enforce that? Like that's your job, right? How do you prioritize school? Well, it should be the #1 priority for kids. And you give them time for that. Again, not overscheduling them. The use of timers can be helpful. So for example, if they have 3 homework assignments, right? And one is taking a lot longer, maybe they need a break. They need to be able to step away, like set a timer, okay? Math, you're gonna use this amount of time and then you're gonna have a break, right? And then again, that's the next bullet point there, building in natural breaks. That allows your child to focus and learn to look forward to the breaks. Like, okay, I just got to power through this. I got to get this done, and then I get a break. And then you talk about what the break looks like, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Then there are time wasters, right? I don't know, sometimes it's just like before you know it, an hour has gone by. We know as adults that can happen. Imagine for a kid, right? And how daunting that might be, like, oh, I don't have enough time or whatever. So really helping them to focus and know what types of things are gonna be distracting so we can eliminate that from the workspace, okay? Help your child to create a space that is free from distractions, super important. Another thing when it comes to time management, teach them chunking and pacing. Maybe something they already do in school, right? Maybe you're not familiar with what it is. So these are strategies that could be helpful. Chunking can be used to avoid procrastination or panic on a large assignment. So chunking means basically I'm gonna group what I need to do, right? In a particular assignment, right? So I'm gonna take it by sections, chunks, right? So that it's bite-sized, like how do you eat an elephant, right? So one bite at a time, it's big, it's huge, okay, but if I look at just this part of it, like, and I think, and this might be for the older kids, but I think of writing a paper. Can we just work on your intro? Let's work on your intro first, right? That first paragraph. So it's those little things, chunking and making it bite-sized for them. And then when you have pacing, that can be useful in teaching children how to lower their stress, especially while testing. Sometimes we have test anxiety, right? Kids, adults, all of us face that. And that could be something, if you learn how to pace yourself, especially math, if you think about how long is it going to take me to do this? This has been an area I'm struggling. I want to try to work on time management. And so for math, we say, okay, this problem is going to take me this long. So they can start to pace themselves and know, if I'm taking more than that time, I'm going to skip that one and come back to it. Not stress over it, but come back to it and give adequate time to the other problems that I might be able to breeze through, and then I can come back and dedicate more time, and it's not crunch time and the test is almost over, right? So again, just teaching them different strategies is super helpful when it comes to time management. Okay, so working memory. This one can be a little tricky. Sometimes it just is hard, right? Because there's an immediacy required for working memory. So I want to give you an example like math again. So you learn multiplication, and then you're doing a word problem, depending on the age of your child, right? And you have to figure out, what is it asking you to do? You can't fly through that word problem. There are going to be key words that are going to teach you what you need or how to set that problem up, right? But you might have to tap into multiplication that was learned a year or two before, right? And so you have to go back to stored memory or long-term memory to research, or I should say retrieve, that information that's needed right now. So you have to apply something that was already learned, and that's the crucial thing about math, it builds, right? And so you have to use concepts that you may have learned previously. So basically working memory can be crucial in executive functioning due to, as I was saying, the immediacy. It requires a student to be able to use information stored in long-term memory and combine it with the current task. And then I gave the example of a math problem. Mnemonics. Some of you may be, familiar with this particular thing, like when we teach our kids the ABC song, right? To learn ABCs, right? And it's that tune, it's the way that you sing it. So there are ways that we teach different patterns to our children through mnemonics, right? Some other examples of that would be like the I before E except after C. There's rhyming involved, right? But we learn that way, and it kind of becomes etched in our brain. Helping your child develop strategies that work for them is key. Some kids learn, they're more visual learners, right? You have to start to recognize, and maybe this is something you can even walk through with your child, because they don't know how to recognize the type of learner they are, right? So we have to help them by teaching them different skills that, visualization might help. Writing the steps down might really etch it in, and okay, now I remember because I can visualize what I wrote down, right? So being able to help them in that way to really, really hone in on what they're good at, right? Because then that's empowering for them. Teaching how to stay engaged, right? What are ways that they can focus? And again, that kind of comes back to breaks too. If they know, okay, I have to focus for this amount of time and then I'm going to get a break, sometimes that helps too, and they can focus and they can kind of regroup and get done what they need to get done. Again, brain breaks and rewards. Sometimes rewards apply, sometimes they don't. So we want to be careful with rewards, right? And make sure that as much as possible they can be natural, that we're not linking certain rewards. Like, I know, I don't want to step on any toes here, some parents give money for grades, right? So that's a thing, right? And maybe in your household it is, maybe it isn't, right? But is that a natural reward? Like, are they really working hard and they got a C? But now they're not going to get $20 or whatever the going rate is for an A because they got a C, but they worked their hardest. What are we teaching them with that? If they work their hardest, and I'm not saying a C is satisfactory, maybe it's not in your household, but when they're doing their best, we have to acknowledge that, right? That is something that is super important, because again, we have to make sure that we're tapping into our children's needs. What they need at that basic level is love and nurturing, right? And support. So mnemonics also include chunking, like we talked about on the last slide. So for example, mnemonics, like a chunking example would be like our social security number, right? That's chunking. We know that it's the 3 digits, the 2, and then the last 4 because we've separated it with the dashes. And so sometimes, you know, adults struggle with this. And again, don't want to step on any toes. But listening for understanding instead of listening to respond. That deals with the working memory, right? With that immediacy. Like we have to stay in the moment, listen, really hear what the person is saying, right? Whether it's a teacher in front of the classroom or whether it's, you know, our parent talking to us, like that working memory is in full effect at that time, right? And you have to really not, you know, have that instinctual response, but listen so that you fully understand what the person is communicating. So that's another one that we can model for them. I already talked about rewards. We want to just make sure, again, with the rewards that we're not reinforcing unhealthy or unrealistic expectations. So that's why I was saying rewards should be natural. Cognitive flexibility. Excuse me. So cognitive flexibility, it involves layers, right? So we have to be adaptable. It can be difficult for children as it calls for the ability to multitask. Even some adults struggle with multitasking, right? And truth be told, they say we don't actually, none of us really multitask well because something's going to get more of your attention, right? If you're doing multiple things, you really can't give 100% to multiple things, right? Okay, so adapting to different tasks or scenarios, right? That's that cognitive flexibility. How flexible can you be? So positivity, the positive mindset. I talked about self-talk a little bit earlier. The self-talk, is it positive or is it negative? That's super important too because remember cognitive, anything when you see that word cognitive is dealing with cognitions, which is our thoughts. What are we thinking about? What's the foundation, right? The foundation is super important. Is that foundation stable, right? Have fun, encourage a sense of humor with your children, right? Let them know that they don't have to take everything so serious, including themselves, right? You should have some fun, build that in. Themselves, the world, like they can't take life too seriously. That is flexibility. Can I be flexible? You know, things are not always gonna go right, right? There are going to be some bumps in the road, right? So we have to teach that. We have to teach that flexibility. Focus and attention to details. So the ways that you can kind of strengthen this is games, right? Again, I was talking about having fun. So things like I Spy, right? Anything that's kind of that call and response. Simon Says, that's something that we can do with kids at many different ages. They enjoy Simon Says, right? And especially I Spy too. Again, problem solving, I talked about that a little bit, and you'll see how so many things kind of intertwine, right? And that's how you see that there are some theorists out there that believe that really executive functioning fits in 3 main areas. But basically with the problem solving, what would you do? Asking those open-ended questions for them, giving them the hypothetical situations. Would you rather scenarios? Would you rather is something that's big, especially in the elementary school, but also middle school and maybe even high school, where you are causing or encouraging your child to really think outside the box, right? Giving them the opportunity to really think, you know, and it could start with something simple like, would you rather the beach or the forest, right? Little simple things like that. Effort, willingness. So with cognitive flexibility, it definitely is going to come down to effort, right? Is your child, and this kind of goes back to the grades too, are they putting in their best effort, right? Are they working to their optimal performance potential? Do they have a willingness to learn? Or when they're not doing well in a class, advocate for themselves. Go to the teacher. Is there extra credit they can do? Is there a study lab or a way that, high schools, they build in resource for the students, right? But most times, even at the elementary school level, if they talk to their teacher and say, I'm struggling with this, the teacher will give them the tools that they need or give them some extra options, whether it's another student who excels in that area, right? But they have to be willing to advocate for themselves. That willingness has to be there. And that's something too that, again, we're modeling for them. They see, when we are, and I'm going to give an example here. Let's say we're going to a new location and we're running late, things are hectic, there's chaos, and maybe we, don't have, nowadays we have navigation on our phones and stuff, but let's just say we don't know how to get there. Are we willing to ask for directions? Are we willing to stop and ask, or do we just get frustrated and just try so hard to solve it ourselves? They will mimic that because that's what mom does. That's what dad does. So we have to pay attention to things like that too. Moving right along. So we've got self-control. So a large part of executive functioning is being able to focus on the task at hand, right? In a world of chaos, how do you regulate, right? When your child is dysregulated, how can they ground themselves? Do they have coping strategies, right? How do you react to stimuli, to stress, to distress, right? How does your child react? Self-control equals effectively managing oneself. That's what I had said earlier, like all things related to self. Effective emotion management. We talked about the emotions and how important they are. We need to validate our children's emotions, and we need to show them, how do you navigate when you're feeling this way? First of all, it's okay to feel that way. We have all our emotions for a reason, right? And so do we need to dig deep and figure out, like, why am I feeling this way? What do I want to do about it? Empower them to ask those types of questions of themselves. Why am I feeling this way? What do I want to do about it? And then again, making sure that we're not looking at emotions and feelings as being good or bad or right or wrong. So also effectively managing expectations of others. Sometimes we have these really, really high standards of other people or expectations of other people. And guess what? They're going to let you down because we're human, we're people. And so really teaching your children also not to have those high expectations on things and individuals that they cannot control. Who can they control? Their self, right? We have to teach them that. Cognitive triangle, again, I explained that, you have a situation or an event, you have a thought about it, and then you emote or you have feelings that are associated with the thought that you had about the situation or the event. And what does that do? That leads to how we act, how we react, how we behave, right? And we have to teach them that they all influence one another, and what do we want to do about it? We have to figure out, like, first of all, and I didn't even talk about this earlier, but that event or that situation is subject to interpretation, right? Do they even have the skills to interpret what happened during that particular event and navigate that, right? Because maybe their interpretation is wrong and they're going off an assumption, right? So that's something that we have to help them with as well, to figure that out. Mindfulness, again, is a nice opportunity for us to really teach our children how to be mindful. What does that mean? Being fully present, being aware, self-aware, right? Staying in the moment. Stop looking so far ahead and thinking what that fortune telling, what you think is going to happen. Stay present, stay in the moment. There are relaxation techniques that we can teach our children as well. Calming techniques. And then I put think and then STA here, and those are examples of mnemonics. So think is an acronym. With think, it is super important that when we are responding to something or someone, that we put this in effect. So the T stands for, is it true? Is it thoughtful? The H is super important that we ask ourselves, is it honest? Is it helpful? The I stands for intelligent or inspiring. Okay, and then we've got the N, which, is it necessary? Especially if you're about to say something, is it necessary, right? And then the K stands for kind. Is it kind? Even if it's a thought that we're thinking about ourselves or our environment or others, right? So the other thing is, if you're spiritual, the K, people will say, is it kingdom minded? So if, for people that are spiritual. STA is super simple. It's just stop, think, act. So think before you act. Really just that super, super simple principle. The STA is something that you can quickly just, say just the STA to a child. And once you've taught them that and they've learned that, then they know, okay, wait, I got to stop. Pause, right? Or maybe you do a sign, right? So there are lots of different ways that you can, work with your children to have some strategies that are going to be effective for them. Self-control, super important. Okay, so basically I was talking about the executive functionings varying, right? There's so many different types of executive functions. And executive functioning can basically be, it can be tricky, but at the same time, it can be simple. If we are just working with our children, we're mindful, we even ask ourselves, what am I modeling? What are they seeing me do? And is it because I'm struggling in an area, right? Just being vulnerable and talking to them about that. So once again, there are varying opinions of just how many executive functioning skills exist. There's plenty of research out there. You're not alone. You don't have to feel like you have to go at this alone. There are many people that have struggled or are struggling with some of the same things you are, right? So also there are tons of tips that support each skill. Research also suggests executive functions begin to develop in infancy and naturally decline as we age. So be empowered. I don't want anyone to be sad about that, because you can help your child get organized and thrive through chaos. Couple resources I wanted to put here. You may already be familiar with the Pathway to Success. They have a lot of information out there. That's just the general website. But they have a lot of tips, specifically even on executive functioning, that you might find some that you're like, this is it, like this is gonna help my child. I know for sure that I'm gonna be able to use these tips, right? Child Mind, if you're familiar with Child Mind, this is a particular article that's on executive functioning, but once again, even that website is super helpful, has a lot of information out there on tons of different things related to children, okay? So definitely look into that if that's something that you want more information on. So the main areas that people argue, I shouldn't even say argue, that people say that executive functioning fit the three main categories is basically working memory, cognitive flexibility, and self-control. They say that all executive functioning kind of stem out of those three. Some people say that. Like I said, there are people that believe that it's up to 12 different executive functioning skills, right? So I did not cover all of there is to know about executive functioning, right? But I wanted to touch on some key areas that you might be struggling with, okay? I know that there were some specific questions. I want to give time for question and answer here, and we've got time for that. But I want to kind of go through here a couple of the questions that I did receive. What are some strategies to simplify a busy schedule? That was a question that I got, which hopefully I covered that, right? We want to make sure that we can make it important to build in downtime and not overschedule our children, okay? So when you say, what are strategies to simplify the busy schedule? I don't know what that schedule looks like, right? And you have to really gauge with your child what busy is, what's too busy, what's too much. Each child is going to be different, right? I was talking with a parent before we started today about two of her daughters that are totally different. That happens, right? They have their own character, their own personalities. Your children are not going to be alike. If you have multiple, you're going to be like, wait a minute, they both came from me, right? Because sometimes there's so many variances, right? So we have to look for that child, and we can't base it off other children that we have. So a busy schedule, what does that look like? It's kind of a hard question. To simplify that, you just want to make sure you're building in downtime for them. You want to make sure you're modeling that. They know it's important, right? They can get bored. It's okay. Let them use creativity. Another question, how to get kids' cooperation in organizing. So I went through organization and hopefully gave good tips on that. If that person that wrote that, because I'm not sure if I didn't get the whole question, let me know if you still have a question in the organization category. Another says, is it common for a child that's 12 years old to not be organized or not have an organized daily routine? Yes, it could be. Right? It depends. So we can't look at age necessarily. We have to look at their environment, what they've been exposed to. Are we setting them up for success? It's never too late to start developing and strengthening executive functioning. Don't get caught up on the age. Another was, what does lack of willingness to declutter working living space mean in children and adults? It's a loaded question. Willingness I talked about is super important, right? You want to see that your child is willing, but there are going to be some things that you have to give a little tough love on, right? They're not willing. Okay, let's talk through what they are willing to do or why. Where's the stubbornness coming from? What is it that they're not willing to do? And can you work through that together? Super important. But decluttering their working and living space, it goes on to this particular parent said, this behavior is the opposite of what my husband and I are and have been teaching them since they were young. So it's super important just to know what that child's key struggles are and trying to hone in on that, because most of the time, depending on how we're actually presenting to our children, right? Are we domineering? Like, do they feel like it's your way or the highway? Like they don't have a say, they don't have that autonomy, they can't self-govern. That will create resistance. So you want to make sure that you're working together. Yes, modeling behavior is super important. So I know this person did say that they are modeling, they feel appropriate behavior, right? But it's hard to say without knowing exactly what's being displayed from that particular child. How to support it says teenage to overcome laziness and complete tasks on time. So again, that comes back to time management. What are the suggestions to support children who need a lot of reminders to learn the skills to organize, learn, and plan without managing them? So again, autonomy, making sure that you're helping them to create a schedule that works for them. And when you see that it's not working for them, then you reconvene. How can we tweak? How can we adjust? But maybe start with asking them, is this working? Right? Let them kind of come up with, oh, yeah, no, it's not. And maybe they say yes. And you're like, what? No, it's not. It's okay. Just say, okay, well, how is it working? Like, just keep digging deeper. And they're going to come up with it. A light is going to come on, a switch is going to flip, and they're going to say, yeah, it's not working. You're going to eventually get to that. Keep at it. Don't give up. My son is very distracted and forgetful, and I struggle to let him complete tasks independently and usually end up giving lots of instructions. So the key part to me in that is I struggle to let him complete tasks independently. He won't. If a parent isn't stepping back, right? Sometimes they have to fail, right? And then you can come back to them and say, okay, what went wrong? What could we do differently next time? Do you think you did your best? Did it work? Did it not work? Like, talk through it with them, right? What other questions do we have? You don't let them wear you down. But seriously, there are going to be some things that I admitted when I first got here today, I'm not tech savvy. I'm not tech savvy and I struggle, and my kids help me. They laugh at me, but they help me. And then I learn things, right? And I am not ashamed, right, to tell them the areas where I struggle and I'm having difficulty, but I'm also not going to be manipulated, and I'm not going to allow them to walk over me, right? There are certain things where you have to push back. And so I know that your children are young. I saw when they came in, and I will just say I'm a mom of 7, and I have 3 grandchildren now too. So my husband and I work really hard, all phases that we have now, adult children, and then our youngest twins are 15 and still in the house, and it's a lot, right? But it's very different from our oldest, right? that are married, and then these younger two, the world has changed a lot. But I still know I may not be tech savvy and I may not know or have all the answers. I don't have to, right? Don't think you have to present that way to your child, that you have all the answers, right? When you don't, you don't, right? But you figure it out together and you work to figure out what works for them. Their personality, their character is going to be different, right? They're going to vary between children, and you meet them where they are, but make sure that you kind of stay firm, if that makes sense. So basically it's going to depend on you learning your child, right? Trust your gut, and you know if something is taking a long time, right? But sometimes you can, and I don't know how much you're interacting with the teacher at the second half of the year. So if this is something currently that's going on, you would have had a check and connect or something with the teacher at this point to know, is he struggling in class? Is it that he's just overstimulated or tired by the time he gets home? Like, are you trying to do math first? If it's math that he's struggling with, you said you're building in breaks, so that's good. You keep at it and you ask him, like, and you try to get a gauge of him, knowing him, what is it that the struggle is really kind of, what's the root, like, of that struggle, so that you'll know, right? And it doesn't hurt to reach out to the teacher and say, this is what I'm seeing at home. What do you see in the classroom? If you don't know at this point, right? But especially beginning of the school year, you might not know when they're dealing with a certain thing, but it doesn't hurt to ask, to answer your question. I don't think that there's a too soon to reach out, right? Using resources that you have. If the teacher is giving resources, use those, right? I wouldn't say it's too soon. I understand that you would be concerned about a label, but you do want him to get help if he needs help. So I wouldn't be concerned about the label. You want him to get what he needs so that he can be successful, because you don't want to stunt his growth in a sense, right? Where, oh my gosh, that started and I recognized it in first grade, but now in fifth grade, right? You don't, and I'm not saying that you will do that, but it's not too soon, and I feel like you should trust your gut. And so you have to, as a mother, do what's right, right? We can't compare to other families and what they do or don't do. Comparison is super difficult. Your household, your rules, you establish that. It's hard, right? And yes, kids will kind of, say things, and you have to teach them. And it sounds like you are teaching some fundamentals that are super important, like integrity, right? And encouraging him, empowering him to do what he knows is right. You have to speak to your son, his character, his personality, and know that you are doing what's right by him. And other parents might not agree, and it may not work for their child, and that's okay. Different households are going to do different things. Keep pushing, right? But just as much as possible, try to stay positive and nurturing. I'm not saying coddle him, because I do understand what you mean by that. But stay positive, nurturing, and I think we're at time.